Hello, Librarian Alex with part 2 of The Tiger Boy by Ted Hughes with fabulous illustrations by Joe McLaren. And thank you to Faber Faber for letting me read your books online at the moment. So Fred has just listened to the tiger story at school and the bell has rung and the teacher hasn't finished the story and everyone's groaned. Maybe a bit like you might have when I stopped the story halfway through at the last video. And Fred has just run home, making great leaps thinking about the tiger. When they were all in their beds and the light out, Fred started to tell his brothers the story of the hunter and the tiger. They listened in dead silence. He told it very slowly, putting in all sorts of details because he wanted to frighten them. Finally, he got to the point where the hunter was sitting in the tree over the grisly head and arms and legs of the woman, with a stump of dead branch sticking into his ribs and his legs gone dead and the jungle night falling. Then the terrible silence. Then the deer barking its tiger warning half a mile away. Then an even worse silence. And at that point, when he knew the tiger had arrived in that pitch darkness, and he was just about to tell about the strange, low sigh, Fred's whole body froze. To his surprise, he found he couldn't speak. Tears of fear were pouring down his eyes onto the pillow. After a few moments, one of his brothers said, "Go on then, what next?" Fred lay silent. He simply could not utter a sound. "He's gone to sleep," said another voice. "The tiger's eaten him," said the first. But nothing came from Fred. The two brothers sank off to sleep, and Fred too, who lay not daring to move, finally drifted off to sleep. He was standing under a tree. It was pitch dark, but gradually he made out that it was the laburnum tree at their garden gate. His eyes adjusted rapidly. He saw the empty street quite clearly, all the sleeping house fronts, as if the moon had come out. But it wasn't the moon. He realised he could see in the dark. The next thing he realised was that he was a tiger. His first thought was that he must get away from the front of the house as quickly as possible, because if his mother looked out and saw him, she would be frightened. Also, and before we carry on, here's another picture. So it's the tiger with kind of Fred inside embodied. Also, if anybody else saw him from some other bedroom, they might guess where he'd come from and start inquiries. He leapt over the garden gate with a wonderful sensation. It was such a joyful feeling. He went bounding up the middle of the street like a giant silent spring. Suddenly, inside one of the houses, a dog started barking madly. Woof, woof, woof. He imagined its goggling eyes and bristling neck. Immediately, Fred was away. He kept in close to the garden walls, so anybody looking out would most likely miss him. He took the shortest cut to the open country. He had no idea what he was going to do. He felt restless and full of seething energy. He thought he might just run a few miles, so long as he didn't meet anybody. It never occurred to him to worry what might happen at dawn. It was such a wonderful feeling, being a tiger, that once he got beyond the last houses, he raced through the darkness, which to him was as clear as if he had headlights. He only wanted to run all night, leaping over the cattle and horses. A strong smell of cows A hot, green, cud-chewing smell came to him. Twirling up his long tail, he bounded towards the dark shapes of cattle lying in a huddled bunch. Gleefully, he thought what a fright he would give them. A roar seemed to gather at the bottom of his chest, but he kept silent. He didn't want to wake the farms with the unnatural roar of a tiger. He permitted himself a few grunts, marvellous booming sounds, as if he had a big drum in his belly. As he lopped across the grass, he would leapfrog over the whole lot. Then, in mid-career, he stopped, flattened to the grass. He had seen two things. One was a big animal, nearly twice the size of a cow, that had got up from among the cows and was enlarging towards him, giving loud sniffs and snorts. It stopped and began stroking the ground as if it were trying to wipe something off its forehoofs. A bull! And that bull seemed to know all about the smell of tiger. And that wasn't all. Another animal, away over to the left, was suddenly even more interesting than the bull. It was so interesting that Fred actually forgot about the bull for a moment and stood up to get a clearer view. Standing on the far side of the field, looking at him, was another tiger. But then the ground was shaking and the bull was coming. Fred felt no fear. He considered leaping over it, leaping aside, or meeting it head-on with a blow of his paw, which felt strong enough to knock a tree down. And he was thinking about that when he got the bull out, and he was thinking that when he got the bull out the way, he'd go and investigate that other tiger. Here we are. There's the bull, the cows, the other tiger. But while he stood trying to decide what to do, the bull hit him. He would never have believed anything could be so heavy or so hard. He knew it was too late to think of doing anything. He was already flying through the air, numbed with the awful black shock of the bull's impact. Boom! He landed on the floor at the side of his bed. Wildly, before anybody could put on the light, he felt at his face and ears. He was normal. He sat there for a while, beside the bed, letting the ordinary world come back. The rest of that night he did not sleep. He kept his eyes as wide open as he could. He was afraid of both the bull and the tiger, waiting there for him the moment he closed his eyes. He didn't feel like sleeping either. Now and again he would reach down to feel his foot, to see if the fur had come back. Next day was a Saturday and no school. He idled away the morning with his brothers, polishing their bicycles for the Sunday ride. But at last he left them and rode off to the edge of town. He rode along the cinder path by the canal. He left his bicycle in the grass, climbed a fence and crossed a field. Even before he got to the thick hawthorn hedge, he paused. From the field beyond came a dreadful sound. For the first moments, he was certain it must be a tiger. Maybe that other tiger. It was a groaning, roaring, complaining sound, like somebody roaring down a long pipe. He crept to the hedge and peered through. There were the black and white cows, and there was the bull, a big white bull. He was walking through the herd, here and there pouring up clods and flinging them back over his haunches, lifting his nose to sniff and make that terrible sound. He was so thick and white and huge, he looked like some other species than the cows. Fred retreated. His adventure as a tiger had given him a whole new notion of the world of bulls. He had never properly looked at one before, but now he had seen enough. He got back home as fast as he could. But an odd thing happened when he reached home. He saw his aunt's red car drawn up at the front gate and felt a little jump of pleasure, knowing that her dog Peter would be with her. This black Labrador was a particular friend of Fred's. Whenever they met, the dog would go into a frenzy of joy, writhing and squirming towards him, making gleeful whimperings, nearly hurling itself from one side to the other with the violent swing of its tail, lifting its upper lip from its teeth in a dog laugh and standing up to embrace him. Fred ran into the house. His brothers were there with two friends, all going round on hands and knees, pretending to be dogs fighting, and Peter was taking part in frenzied delight, growling and barking and whacking the furniture with his tail. As Fred came into the room, he called to Peter, here boy, to get him away from his brothers. The dog jumped up erect and looked at Fred, tail swinging. But after that first look, a strange transformation took place. Peter's body seemed to double in size, as all his black hair stood on end, and his teeth appeared as his face shriveled up in a mad snarl, and he backed away, crouching. Then suddenly he uttered a yell, "Ah!" and dashed away from the room into the kitchen, yelling as if he'd been run over. Fred's mother came out of the kitchen, demanding to know who'd hurt the dog. His brother stood up baffled. Fred could hear his aunt in there coaxing Peter. "Something's absolutely terrified this dog. I can't get him out," she called. Then they all went into the kitchen. His aunt was on her hands and knees, reaching under the stove where Peter had jammed himself far back against the wall. Fred bent down, eager to reassure his friend, and reached a hand under the stove. "Come on, Petey boy," he kept saying. "Come on." A noisy scramble turned into a black, silent bolt of a dog, hurtling. Wait, here's that image of the dog snarling at Fred. Hurtling from the kitchen back into the living room, and then everybody heard a crash of glass, followed by silence. They went into the living room and saw the jagged edges of the main front window. Peter had obviously gone straight through. The boys rushed outside. Peter had disappeared. The boys started to hunt. But Fred didn't join the hunt. His meeting with Peter had frightened him afresh, more than it frightened Peter. He knew what had frightened Peter was a tiger. Somehow, looking at his old friend Fred, Peter had seen a tiger. Fred went to his bedroom. He took his shoes off and felt his feet, then sat looking at his eyes in the mirror. After a while, even though it was early afternoon, he crept under the blankets. What should he do? Ought he to tell somebody? What if he actually was turning into a tiger? He just didn't know what to do, and he didn't dare tell anybody. He found a book and lay there, trying to read. Then bedtime came, Saturday night. His brothers were noisy, but Fred told them he had a headache and lay in bed with his face turned to the wall. Gradually they fell silent, and Fred too eventually sank off to sleep. And picture of the boys asleep in bed. Wow, I think it's a really powerful story and surprising. It leaves you hanging. Was he turning into a tiger? There are quite a few stories about people transforming into animals, or animals transforming into people. The tiger boy. Maybe you could write your own story about if you turned into an animal, which one would it be? A bit like maybe his Dark Materials, the Philip Pullman trilogy. Every animal has a demon. Every person has a demon, which is an animal that represents them. What would your animal be? I'm going to think about mine. See you soon. Bye.